Deb, I was actually just reading your article on what happened to women in product, I think it was. It's
Yeah.
such a fascinating read.
Oh, thank you. I worked on that article for almost 4 years before I published it.
Oh, really?
I started it and then I kept coming back to it over and over and actually shared it in 2020, but I had been thinking about it for years. And so it's it's really fascinating. So if you still, I don't know if Elizabeth, you can share it in the chat, but
Oh, yeah.
I was just really thinking like, what happened to all the women in product management when I started out? And so I kind of did a detective work to figure it out. And so it's pretty fascinating, but it also brings us to where we are today, which is there are very few women who are in the senior ranks compared to what could have been.
Yes. Yeah.
I remember the
And
first time I was trying to get into product and I was in product marketing. And one of the product managers had said, you should stick with marketing, because I didn't have an engineering degree. And so in the meantime, it was all of my product marketing insights that were helping inform product strategy. So yeah, it's definitely an interesting dynamic. Interesting
Yeah, I
thing.
mean, I spent almost 7 years leading product teams, and then I went into product marketing because that's where I could get my next job. And it turns out the job I was doing is very close to product management that they didn't even re-interview me. They just said, why don't you become a product manager? So,
Yeah.
yeah. Oh, there you go. Well, when we break up into the Blender, I'll go find that link and post it for everybody. It's a great article, and I think it really kind of sets the stage in many ways for why right now is kind of a critical time with so many CPO type level roles emerging and product being seen as a C-level role and really critical. We're kind of just starting to recover. Women are just sort of starting to recover from that period, that fallow period when the CS degrees were really required. So, oh, look, Ariana found it and posted it.
that's great.
All over it. Thank you. But it really makes clear that it's really important right now to make women who are in very senior and executive roles more visible so that they can step into those CPO, COO, CEO roles. Like we've definitely had some women step into those CEO roles, Deb being a great example, but also Fiji and several other people stepping into really big prominent roles. So yeah, that's great. So we have people kind of wandering in, it looks like kind of slowly here. So if you're joining us, it would be great if you could update your profile, because when you're in the networking, the one-on-one networking, that's the information that other people will receive about you. And that is where you're going to go to get your information at the end of the event about who you connected with. So it's in the upper right-hand corner. If you could make sure you update your profile info, that would be great. First stop. And we're going to get started in just a couple of seconds. So, okay. So let's see. I'm going to give it just another minute and then we'll get started. Okay.
Deb, do you mind if I ask why was it a 4-year process to work on that article?
Well, it was inspired by April Underwood. So at the time, I think she was a VP of product at Slack and she became the CPO of Slack at one point. And we just kind of talked about it, thought, oh, that's really interesting. And then I started kind of doing the detective work. And part of it was just really kind of digging in, like, how do we get here? And talking to tons of people. I talked about the article to probably more people have read it. And then, as I put it together, I realized what happens, which was the requirement of CS degrees, as Elizabeth said, but also the fact that a lot of women couldn't get their next PM job. So, you are a successful PM and then you suddenly no longer qualify for your own job. And so moving from company to company became really hard. And so, but I kept thinking, like, how can I be the only person who noticed this? And a lot of it was just the imposter syndrome of not believing that maybe like something else happened. And I just kept asking people and talking to people. And finally, I decided to publish it because I think it was time for me. And I wanted to hear if other people also had the same experience. And what's been really interesting is you read the comments on that post, a lot of people said, this happened to me, and I had no idea why. And I thought it was me. And the same thing happened to me as well, you know? And so I think just putting it out there brought together all the people who had that same feeling.
Yeah. Well, and then I know people who were engineers at product managers, but that had engineering degrees at Google, who said my engineering degree had no bearing on my ability to do my job.
Well, I think what was really interesting was when I was at Facebook, three of the most successful VPs of product were myself, Fiji, and Naomi, which Elizabeth had mentioned, all speakers. Fiji was the co-founder of the organization, and we ran actually engineering teams too, not just product teams, and none of us had a CS degree. And so there's a qualification that none of us had, and yet we were very successful and three of the most successful women product leaders. And so it just reminds us that sometimes we have qualifications that are largely unnecessary, and keep a diversity, keep amazing people from the field itself. And I think that is the reminder for all of us.
Yeah. So it looks like we kind of have a quorum of people. So I want to just one last time remind people who are just joining us that you would be well served to update your profile. It's in the upper right-hand corner. That's the information that will be shared about you when you are doing one-on-one networking. So please update that information if you can. And I think we'll get started. And I want to start by welcoming Deb and Cassie, Cassandra. I don't know if you.
Cassie's great.
Okay, Cassie, to the blender today. It's great to have you both here. And for those of you who maybe don't know one or either of these two phenomenal women, Deb Liu is the CEO of Ancestry, a tech company focused on helping people connect to their family history and tell their family story. She's also one of the co-founders and the board president of Women in Product, as well as a board member at Intuit. Prior to joining Ancestry, Deb was the vice president of Facebook app commerce. So a pretty fabulous resume. And Deb, welcome. It's great to have you here. Cassie Campbell is the vice president of product at Leaselock. Prior to Leaselock, she served as the vice president of product for FAIR. She was a speaker. She's been a speaker at several Women in Product conferences, both in 2019 and in 2020. So Cassie, welcome. It's great to have you both here. You've both been really involved with this organization, and we really, really appreciate it. So I wanted to kind of start our conversation today, which is really about negotiating executive compensation, and ask each of you to kind of tell your story of negotiating executive compensation. And Cassie, maybe we could start with you, and you could kind of share the experiences that you've had over the last few years, or your most recent ones.
Okay, sounds great. I'll share one really quick, which was more of the coaching one, I think, to start. And that was a little bit serendipitous because I coached someone, and then Ariana reached out about this. And I had just days prior received a text message from someone saying, I just got a 37% increase in my compensation. And with the same organization with whom this person was working. And so it was not a role change. It was not a new company. It was a re-leveling. And I think it's a really interesting story because, it starts off with understanding what we're worth in a way, right? From that financial perspective. And often people don't understand that or understand how that's evolved, right? Especially if their roles and responsibilities have shifted and grown over tenure.
Yeah.
So this individual really ended up needing to know, okay, got some signals that there were peers potentially making materially more money. And we just went down the path of, well, let's validate what your market what rate is in a way, right?
Mhm.
We did that through using a tool called 81 Cents. It's a company. Jordan is the founder there, and they help women get a personalized report on their compensation and history and potential in market through market research with other people that have had those same roles and or have hired for those roles in similar sized companies. And through having that data to complement data from, online resources, et cetera, this person was then empowered to put together their story and really make a case with their manager
Mhm.
to say, hey, I'm dedicated to this organization. I'm really excited about the growth I've had here and my potential. You've clearly leaned into that with some of the reviews and smaller bumps and updates, but there's a market adjustment that needs to be made here.
Mhm.
And I think it's also worth noting that that's a really good thing to do when you understand more about the organization and the compensation strategy and the initiatives at the organization, right? Because this organization had very clearly been sending signals out that they're focused on diversity, they're focused on inclusion, they're focused on growing female leadership within their organization, et cetera. So it was like the timing was right.
Yeah.
And with the right information, and feeling authentically dedicated to the organization too, right? It wasn't necessarily a jockeying for position thing for this individual. They were able to make their case and have it escalated from the manager through, and this is at director level, right? So up through the ranks. And it took a little while. It took a couple of weeks, I think, actually, before the news came back. And it was, oh, we're going to make this right. So I think that's a really great story for people to hear, because it can be really intimidating for some. And just to know that there are some organizations that are going to stand by what they said they're going to do, which is
Yeah.
the inclusion and equity, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's also interesting that an organization who said that they were committed to that didn't necessarily have the woman on parity, right? And I think it's just a really good reminder that there's no substitute for taking responsibility and asking for that stuff, not just leaning back and thinking that somebody's going to deliver it to you, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Taking that agency and is important.
Yeah. And Deb, I'd love to hear, your story about, negotiating compensation. I mean, obviously, you just made a big, huge job change, and so I think you got a big dose of experience doing that recently.
Absolutely. So, one of the things, and I'm happy to share that story because, when I went to PayPal, so I only really changed jobs. I had a job at PayPal and then eventually at eBay, but there was no change between the jobs. I was at Facebook for 11 years. So I was at both of those companies collectively 18 years. And then I went to Ancestry, and I didn't negotiate when I went to PayPal. And I also didn't really negotiate when I went to Facebook. They told me, well, we don't really do that. And by the way, I was on the other side of negotiating at Facebook. There's always room. So most companies leave a little bit of room for you to negotiate, whether it's a signing bonus, whether it's a little bit of extra stock or something else, because they want some flexibility to value what you value. And so, one of the things that's really challenging is a lot of recruiters will immediately say no, but actually the answer is maybe. And so don't take it as a no when the first no comes. You might want to just say, hey, what is your flexibility on X before you go on? For the CEO role, I actually hired an executive compensation negotiator on my behalf because I really didn't know that much about private equity. It's a very different compensation system than, PayPal was newly public, and Facebook was pre-IPO. Obviously, it was many years before the IPO, and so, I really didn't understand the private equity structure. So I hired someone to actually do it on my behalf. It was pretty intimidating to choose to do that because you feel like I should be able to do this myself, but actually, it put a distance between myself and the people I would work with, so that it wasn't personal. Right? It was someone else negotiating on your behalf. And in some ways, that was the best thing because you could ask for these things through somebody, but you weren't damaging the relationship by them feeling like it was you fighting for the thing that you wanted. And it really worked out well for me in terms of really understanding the private equity structure and then knowing what you can ask for and what not to. I just didn't even know what I could ask for. And this person had done dozens of these. I had actually been introduced to this person from a public company CEO who, they had negotiated the public company CEO compensation for multiple well-known CEOs. And so one of the things that was great was I was able to kind of get information and know where I could push.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many things in what you just said that kind of makes my head explode. Like, first of all, that there's people that negotiate compensation. I guess it should be obvious that when you're at that executive level, that there are people that help you do that. But it didn't really occur to me until you told me that story. And then the other thing is just this, seems like such a obvious thing, but again, I didn't think of it, but really thinking about the structure of the organization that you're stepping into. If you're stepping into a public company, that's different than stepping into an early stage startup, or, a startup that's a little bit more advanced, or private equity, which I don't really know much about, right? And so it's interesting to think about really just understanding that helps you understand where the levers are, I would guess, in terms of what you can ask for or what is the norm in those environments. So, yeah.
And a lot of people are not negotiating a CEO package, but even when you're negotiating, I can give you a few stories of PMs that I've helped negotiate for and advise them. One PM said, "Hey, I got this great offer from a big tech company." And I looked at it and I was like, "It seems a little low." And she was shocked. It was because she was coming out of a startup that was kind of middling and it wasn't doing super well. So she was looking for something different. And for her, it was a huge step up. And I had no idea when she showed me the offer. And so then I said, "Why don't you go and talk to a couple big companies and just see what you're going to get?"
Yeah.
And she talked to two more big companies. So these, all three are fairly big companies. And the second company gave her an offer and it was kind of similar to the first offer, but I knew it was a low ball. And I said, "I think this is a low ball. You need to get the third offer." So she went and got a third offer. And, she came back to the second company, which was, I think, her preferred company. And she said, "This other company offered me X." And I taught her how to negotiate. I said, like, "Say this." And we wrote down exactly what she was going to say. And I said, "Just say this directly. Like, call the recruiter and say, 'I got this third offer. You're my favorite of the three. I think that, I want your offer, but I feel like it's low.'" And in the end, she got more than twice as much stock as she had gotten in the first offer.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I was helping a different person negotiate his offer, but he didn't get a second offer. And he's like, "I feel like this is good enough." And he was also coming out of a startup that was, not doing super great. And he's like, "I feel like this is enough." And I said, "I think you need to go out and get another offer." And then he took it. And he didn't get more. And I felt like in that circumstance, they were actually in very similar situations. And yet one person got substantially more stock than the other. And it kind of breaks my heart to see people leave money on the table. And so, but at the same time, I think, what you are choosing is really, are you willing to put yourself out there? She was willing to walk away from the second offer if they weren't willing to match what the third offer was. But the third offer wasn't from her preferred company. And so, really kind of knowing what you're willing to walk away with. Whereas, if you are like, "This is my dream company, I will go no matter what." And that was kind of how my first two negotiations were, is I would just go no matter what, in which case I didn't have any leverage either. And so one of the things is really learning to negotiate such that know what your leverage is. They want you. And at this point, the onus is on you to tell them what you want to get you in the door.
Right. And, talk a little bit about, when you're negotiating the fullness of that package, and Cassie, maybe you want, I think when you step into startup environments, there's a lot of kind of different pieces to it that you can negotiate, and they have different values, right? Stock versus other things. How did you think about that when, you have been in more startup environments? How have you thought about that and negotiated that as you've been in those environments?
Absolutely. Yeah. So the and by the way, each role, right? And I think Deb, you referred to this too. Each role is a new time up at bat, right? To figure out, how am I going to do this in a, in a new and better way for myself as I'm exploring my, my package here. And so I would say, my most recent role, my focus was on, I'm reporting into the CEO, and I want to make sure that I'm going to be setting myself up for the most amount of success in this role, right? And for me, that meant, okay, I'm joining an early stage Series A startup, and I want to have some confidence to be able to create influence and not necessarily, and this is my own growth journey, right, as a product manager, but to be able to advocate for what I felt was important and not operate, and this might sound a little funny, but like not operate from a place of fear, right? And so I think that comes a little bit into the being willing to walk away a little bit, right?
Yeah.
And really advocate for what I thought was really important strategically, even if it were potentially unpopular,
Yeah.
right? Amongst the leadership team. And I think that's such an important thing to bring in a leadership role, especially in a startup, because you're navigating in such tricky waters. And so for example, one of my peer coaches had recommended negotiating a severance package in, right? If it weren't for non-performance, right? So as long as I were performing and I had that, but if there were any reason why we would need to part ways, that I would have that cushion and have that integrated into my package. And that gave me a lot of peace of mind as I entered into the role to be able to, um, you know, maybe flex a little bit more than I would have in prior roles, to be fair. And I think that that is one component that was new for me. Obviously, I didn't. I mean, the stock component is really important as well. For me at that time, I had two offers, so I was also casting a wide net for understanding my alternatives and I think that's really important. One other resources, right? Aside from getting another offers, at the time I was working with an executive recruiter for another role, and I had also been talking to a number of VCs and knew, there are different, for a Los Angeles-based startup with this size revenue, and this size company for a product manager at this level versus a CPO versus a VP, right? They have comp
Mhm.
data, right?
Yeah.
And so I was able to calibrate and understand what that would look like in a Series A startup of the size that I was looking at versus a larger company may have looked as well. So, there's a lot of data, and I think being able to find your way and access into that is something that is be helpful for people. Again, why I would recommend something like 81 cents, because you can kind of cast a wide net that way as well.
Yeah.
But having that was really helpful. I was talking to Ariana earlier about the book. I have it in front of me. The Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss is the
Oh,
negotiation
yeah.
book, right? And one of the quotes he has in there is, negotiation is not an active battle, it's a process of discovery.
Mhm.
And I think as product leaders, we're all very leaned into the concept of discovery.
Mhm.
And, it's great to just ask the question, hey, I'm going to be building a team. What's the compensation strategy that you have at this company? Are you targeting 75th percentile for other similar size startups in the area, or
Right.
95th percentile, and why? And how does that going to help me understand, if I'm going to be accountable for building and developing a team, what that's going to look like? And to understand components like that in the strategy of the company helps you then understand further down the line, I think, as well.
Yeah. So I got a couple of questions here, and I think they're good ones. So one of them,
One, actually, Elizabeth, before we go to the questions, I do want to touch on something Cassie said, but she didn't say
okay.
explicitly, which is you can negotiate more things like the severance package, but other things you can negotiate is I want to report directly to the CPO or to the VP of products because there's more headroom for you. You can negotiate a lot of things that you think are non-negotiable. So, remote work, you could negotiate, like there's a lot of things, especially depending on the company, that are on the table that you might not actually think are on the table.
Yeah.
And so really don't, titles, for example, are negotiable too.
Yeah.
And, whether you come in as an IC or a manager. So ask for what you want that will get you to where you want to go. Because a lot of these things, especially at more flexible startup companies, they're more flexible around some of the opportunities that they can give you. If you can get on executive staff, if you can, you represent in certain areas, like you can actually like ask for what you want, and maybe it's a higher title. Just,
Yeah.
same scope of responsibility. You say, hey, this is a smaller company. I was already a director at this other company and this larger. I think I should ask for a senior director or VP title. A lot of things are on the table, but it also means that they won't necessarily, if you have a VP title, they're not going to necessarily hire a VP over you either.
Right.
And so these things do matter in the long term, even though you think it might not matter today.
They do. And, I think the point that you made, Cassie, about it's an exploration, it does really help you understand sort of where the company's values are or where the boundaries are and why. And that may be good information about, how good of a fit that company is for you and just sort of the lay of the land that you're stepping into. So it kind of feels like I know that when people are interviewing for jobs, they feel like they're the ones answering the questions. But I always try and encourage people to ask questions because you need to know if this is a job you want and that you're going to end up being productive and happy in as well. So it's a two-way street there. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I was negotiating directly with our CEO, right? And in my head, I was thinking the manner in which I just negotiate this with him is going to be a representation of how I would negotiate with a partnership or any other business relationship that we would have as an organization, right? So it was really important for me to demonstrate the curiosity and interest on both parties so that we could come up with a solution that's going to maximize the value. It's the same thing in a hiring relationship. So it was almost like we got to test each other out and being able to talk to each other and hear each other's needs and concerns. And, if I could hear the empathy in his voice, then that would come back towards, we would reciprocate. Right. So I think it was a really great experience to be able to go and do that. And just abstracting it mentally from here I am asking for what I want, which absolutely, I think it's important to do. And to explore all the facets of that, even path two, right? Like this is the path. I'm here now, and this is what we're talking about. This is where I want to go to. Yeah. Let's make that explicit in this moment. I think is also really great because then it makes it natural to have that conversation 90 days after you start and say, okay, great. So we talked about this path, and how are we going to now navigate that together? So,
right.
But yeah.
Yeah. So. Deb, to go back to the question that I'm seeing from people, you brought up people getting multiple offers or giving people the advice to go back and get another offer. And one of the questions was like, sometimes it takes a long time for that to happen. I mean, sometimes companies have a really extended process and you're kind of hung out there. Can you talk a little bit about that? I think people are a little like, oh, how would I actually make that happen? And would that just take too darn long?
Yeah, so I think that, look, it's not always practical, right? And a lot of companies give you an offer and they say you have a week or 2 weeks to decide. And it's a pressure cooker at that point because you're negotiating and you're deciding on something else at the same time. Yeah. And one piece of advice I would give is, as you're doing that, if it's not feasible to get another offer, then the other option is to say, okay, here's how much I'm worth. Go do your research. And, they can't legally ask for, in most states, your previous compensation, but you can say, I will come for this. Now, they don't know if you're coming for this because you have another offer or because you asked your friend who has the offer, but, know what you're worth and be willing to walk away if they're not willing to give you what you're looking for. And that usually involves, one of the things I think we should be more transparent about is actually compensation, which is, it's really hard to know whether you're being underpaid if no one says anything. And so ask somebody in a similar situation, if you're going to a Series B startup, go ask somebody who's in VC, who has access, by the way, all of them have access to all this data. So all the executive recruiters, all the VCs have tables for a lot of these things. And so you can get access to a lot of those things. Go to Glassdoor if it's a larger company, because those are often, bands are kind of given to you. The other thing is, if you start a process with another company, just say, what does your compensation look like if I continue this path? So that you can get a sense of where you're going to land. And then you can use that, even if you say, hey, I'm talking to this other company, but my first choice is you, Elizabeth, I would love to come here. Here's what I'm asking for. This other company is probably going to offer me X, but I will exit the interview process in order to take this job if you can match it.
Yeah.
Like, there are ways to kind of get to what you want without the whole process. I think women kind of feel like, I need to have the piece of paper to show somebody else.
Yes.
That is not necessarily true. There are other ways to get at that. And so you have to be a little bit creative.
And I think everybody has this sense too, that like, you do this dance, right? Like, you talk to a recruiter and they're like, well, what is your expected compensation? To which I'm always like, well, I don't know. What do you expect to pay for this job? And I'll tell you if I think it's in the range of what I would be interested in. But it sounds like what you guys are really saying is do your homework, or at least do some homework, so that you have a reasonable level of what you think you're worth to this kind of a company, so that when that comes up, you can ask them what they expect the compensation for that position to be, or you can state, this is what I'm looking for, right? If you're not in this ballpark, it's probably not the right position for me for whatever reason.
I imagine for a lot of executive women in these roles, you might be working with a recruiter too, right? So if you're working with somebody at an executive placement firm, their interest is in placing you fairly, right? And they have all of that information that Deb was just talking about. So, I mean, I've been in offer stages there, and had very candid preparation conversations with the recruiter getting into offer, and so was able to really lean on that to understand, both the company's compensation strategy and plan, right? What constraints that they may have, right? Because each company is going to have a different, especially in smaller early stage startups, there's going to be different scenarios.
Yeah.
But that was a really great data point to lean upon, was the executive recruiter, which should have both parties' interests in mind. I would say for my first VP role, I recall asking two people that had been VPs of product in similar stage companies, and said, and I think I was a senior director at the time, I was going for my first VP title. And I said to two of them, what should I target? Right. So I wasn't asking them what they made or anything like that. Just saying, hey, what should my target range be? Give me a range.
Mm-hmm.
And one got back to me, and I just went with that and targeted it, and I got it, right? And then the next person got back to me after the offer stage and gave me a much lower number. So, unfortunately, the first person had been a man and the second person had been a woman, right? So, it's like the cliche, playing itself out right there. But that's why I'd say cast a wide net to get the data. But I think that is, if it's intimidating to ask people, just asking people, what should I target, is a much less intimidating way than saying, what should this be, for example.
I like that sneaky strategy. Ask men what to target.
Well, it's also data's power. There was a friend of mine who got an offer at a fairly large company and said, I'm entering at this role. What do you think? And she kind of shared what range, and I said, that is really low. You should go back and ask for more. She got substantially more, like many digits more. And a lot of it was just she didn't know, right? She had been out of the kind of big company game for a long time, and she just didn't know what a reasonable comp was. And in the end, she got substantially more stock after hearing that, and she didn't have to get another offer. She just had friends at other companies. So I said, look, here's what I think the range should be at this kind of company, but here's three other people you could probably talk to as well.
Yeah. So I want to make sure that we provide time for people to go network one-on-one. I think we can send them off to do that. I was wondering if the two of you had a suggestion, or either of you had a suggestion for sort of things that they might talk about in their networking, or that they could come back with, like what I don't know, if you have any suggestions there.
Well, before we came in, Cassie and I said, this should be the best blender, because this is the high ROI hour that you're spending with us.
Yes.
So I think each of you should make it a target. Like, how do I do better in either my next job or my current job? What should I ask for? What are my options? Because I think that is a good conversation starter, which is to force yourself to say, okay, this is not just a conversation, but this is an exercise to get me more than what I have today. What would I do? And let's just do it as a thought exercise. Maybe you don't ever do anything about that, but it kind of opens up the flexibility to ask for more. Well, all of you have inspired me. I will write an article about this as well, because I just met four actually, for a brief second, amazing women, many of whom I found out are underpaid. So I think it's a good reminder that we have more work to do.
Yeah, I think that would be great. And that's a great opportunity to let everybody here know that Deb has a Substack email that she does, and it's fabulous. So I can unreservedly say sign up for it, because she has lots of great insight, and it's well worth getting. So yeah, totally.
Oh, there, it worked.
Yay, it's like magic.
So mine is super timely. A friend sent this to me this morning. I'm actually going to talk with the CEO who's going and the HR, and they're going to give me an offer today at 6 p.m.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So it's head of product at Series A, and I have an idea of what engineering makes. I'm wondering, are there any ratios? Because I expect the engineers to make and leader of eng to make more than leader of product. But is there any rule of thumb for that ratio? Because I know I have a general idea what they make, and so I can kind of baseline on that, but I can't find any good stats on that.
So from what I can tell, most companies actually equate product and engineering at this point because they're equally difficult to hire for and they're equally precious. And so often most companies will actually keep them on the same band, like some sort of tech band versus say a sales or a business band. So I think you should just expect that you should be paid just like the engineering VP. You said it's a VP position, and start there. And if they offer you something lower, at least you kind of know that they treat you differentially. But I think one of the things that we underestimate is to say, well, product managers aren't as important as engineers. I don't think that's true in the industry anymore.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
So I have a comment and a question here. So I see this title, head of product, regularly. It's almost always in a startup. I don't think that title translates well to bigger companies. I think they're unclear on what that means. Does anybody have any insight or recommendations about whether that's a title that you should take, or whether you should encourage them to make it a VP of product management or some such thing? I don't know, Deb or Cassie, if you have an opinion on that.
Cassie?
I guess I could take that because I've taken the head of product role before. So yeah, I've been a VP now at 3 Series A startups, and then one that was less of a startup, but so kind of had 4 VP titles. And I think that I've seen people use the head of context when they are literally like the head of, and not like a chief, right? So it's not a chief title, but you're really leading a department. And we have people in our organization who also use that title. And I think sometimes I've seen it also reflected when people are entering organizations of different sizes or kind of transitioning, right? So it's like if you had a certain title somewhere else and then the titles are different over here, but really you're leading a function, like that's what is perceived to matter. People will sometimes use that head of title as well. But
clarification for Wendy, which is, it's a VP of product or a CPO role?
It's they're calling it head of product.
Head of product. Okay.
But Eng is head of engineering.
Got it.
So
because one of the things that you need to do also at a startup is often that, let's say you come in as a director versus a VP. If you come in as a director, they might hire a VP over you. If you come as a VP, they might hire a CPO over you. But if you get the CPO title, they're not going to, they literally have to demote you to get you out, right? And so I would negotiate also for the title that you want, so you don't, then the company is scaling and then, the investors go, well, you could use a CPO since you don't have one. And suddenly you're kind of pushed down in the organization, no longer executive staff or something else. So I would just see kind of feel out what their appetite is. Sometimes they'll say, hey, we're not hiring a CPO today, but it gives them option value to push you down at some point.
I've already had that discussion. That's been part of the discussion is, was this head of product because the investors have some concerns about some of my experience because I'm really good at executing, but I don't necessarily articulate well in an interview. And so I know I'm going to have to prove myself when I get in.
But then have a very clear path that's written out that says, to get to CPO, here's the distance, the things you need to work on, and just be super clear so that you don't end up in a situation where you really feel like you missed the boat there and you get pushed down in the organization. You lose kind of your executive staff space as well as kind of any ability to continue to be the head of product.
Yeah,
thank you. I appreciate
that. That one also, you can talk with your CEO, right, about the intention there, right, and just speak to the expectation that I expect there will be a path to CPO when there is readiness for that from a maturity of organization standpoint, and have that kind of pre-stated, right? So that so that it's part of your expectations.
I'm also just making the point because I believe titles do matter, and startups tend to be very loosey-goosey with title and say it's this, it's that, but that isn't translate well on your resume over time necessarily. So I just think it's always something for you to think about, and whether that is exactly the title that you want or you want something else, ask for it, right? So it does matter, and people will wave you off and say, oh, it doesn't really matter, it's not important. It is important. So
I appreciate that. I will let the next person, I'm not sure what button I need to do to.
I think you have to push a button to step off, but Pearl, I think this will kind of be the last question because I want to be respectful of people's time. We said that we would be done at 5. So Pearl, you have a question?
Thank you. I do. Yes. So I had to negotiate last year and I did it. It paid off, but I really struggled with it. Right. So going and talking to a recruiter, asking for more money was emotionally, like, I really felt like I really dreaded those conversations. Like it was almost easier to like live with less money. So I don't know, does it get easier? What do you tell yourself to overcome that? Or like just this fear of sounding greedy or wanting more?
I would say this, which is ask yourself, the pain is upfront, but ask yourself, does the future you in 2 years, 5 years, wish that you had asked for more? And I think the answer is yes. Like the title that you want, the compensation that you want. When you find out that your male colleague is making more stock than you in the same position, are you going to be happy? And so it's within your hands. And, as much as you fight for your product and your users, fight equally for yourself and your family. Yes. And, you have to learn to ask and be okay with asking. And the discomfort sucks. The way I've actually helped a lot of people who do negotiate is write a script. When you go into an executive presentation, you don't just wing it. You have the slides, you have notes, you have things you're going to say, you have points you want to land. Same thing, plan, say. And I actually helped somebody write a dialogue. And I said, if they say this, you say this, because they were so nervous. And I said, you got to have it locked in, just like you would do an executive presentation, because it's that important.
And I would say even practice it, get somebody who will listen to you through it, because anytime you do that, you just feel more confident when you're doing it. Like somebody throws something at you, you feel like, oh, I know how to answer that, because I'm ready, I'm practiced.
And
go ahead.
Oh, I just said I've role played with a lot of people, and the first time it feels terrible, but by the 4th or 5th time, you're like, okay, I got this. I know what they're gonna say. So role play and just get yourself comfortable. This is a very important negotiation. It's a difference between, it could be millions of dollars over the course of 10 years of your career. And so you really need to think hard about what you're leaving on the table. And that little discomfort, that pinch sucks, but it's way worse to find out that you're being underpaid.
Yeah. I'll just add on to that real quick. I think that the reframe, in addition to all of the practice, think about what the objections are going to be, right? Potentially the things you might ask. And then through, these, the book, Never Split the Difference, which I loved, right? You can think how you can reframe that and practice tactics for those. But the other reframe on it is, just turn it into, I'm demonstrating my skill and my ability to negotiate on behalf of this company, right? If you had to negotiate a software deal with some other, vendor, or if you had to negotiate a partnership for a big BD deal, right, and represent with product, you're not going to be afraid to do the discovery, to do the ask, right? And this is the same representation of your capacity to do that and ability to do that as an executive leader. So just reframing it into something like that, and then it's exciting. It's okay, cool. I get to really practice this and try and do it really well and work on my skills. And it's not about me asking for money, even though it kind of is, right? It's more about me demonstrating how to operate as an executive.
So showcasing my skills of what I can do for them, in a respectful but assertive way. Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate that.
Well, I think that's a great place to end. I want to thank Cassie and Deb for joining us today, and thank all of you for coming. And get out there and negotiate for better pay and bigger positions. That's what we wish for all of you, that you have the jobs that you want and that you can advance in your careers. So thank you both. And all of you join us the next time we have another blender. So
And go ask for what you want.
go
If
ask.
if you're not hearing no enough, you probably aren't asking enough. So
There you go. See?
It's so true. Yeah.
Thank you both.
Thank you.